Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Muhammad Faris Rafi. My name is Muhammad Faris Rafi, and I was from grade 10 RPLA. Today, I want to make a presentation about the sinking of RMS Titanic. But in this slide, or in this video, or in this presentation, I will not talk about the movies about Titanic. You probably heard about Titanic movies in 1987. I will not talk about that, but I will focusing on the history. I mean, the tragedy of this and the sinking of RMS Titanic, and the history behind the Titanic itself. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. So before we get into this tragedy of the Titanic, let's begin with uh, the history about Titanic itself. So many people don't know that Titanic has an older sister. Uh, I mean, like, Titanic has a ship, very identical ship named RMS Olympic, or you can call it Olympic only Olympic. So, actually, Olympic was the first ship to be constructed because Olympic began its construction on December 16, 1908. Meanwhile, Titanic began its construction on March 31st, 1909. So it's about 3 months later. Uh, okay, I mean, like, RMS Olympic began on December 16, and then 3 months later, the Titanic began its construction. So RMS Olympic is the older one. As you can see from the bottom picture, the bottom right picture, the right one, the white one is RMS Olympic, and the left one, the darker one, is RMS Titanic. So many people don't know what RMS means. So RMS is stand for Royal Mail Ship. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. So Olympic is the ship to be finished. Olympic is the first ship to be finished and first launched because it was constructed first. And Olympic was launched on October 20, 1910, and then made its maiden voyage on 15th of June 1911 from Southampton to New York City. At that time, Olympic was the biggest ship in the world until Titanic, her sister ship, was launched, beating Olympic itself from the biggest ship in the world. Let's move on to the next slide. So after Olympic was finished, Titanic was finished on and launched on May 31st, 1911. After the launching of Titanic, Titanic was the biggest ship in the world, beating her own sister, the RMS Olympic. Let's move on to the next slide. So many of people cannot see the difference between RMS Olympic and RMS Titanic. So here I show you the picture. The top one is Titanic, the bottom one is Olympic. I have given an arrow so you can see the difference between Titanic and Olympic. So on the A deck, as you can see, the deck on the Titanic is a half open and half closed with smaller windows. On the Olympic, the deck is fully open. And the bottom of A deck, as you can see on the Olympic, the window is larger, wider, and has a smaller spaces between windows. Meanwhile, on the Titanic, the windows is much smaller, but the spaces between windows and windows is much wider, unlike Olympic. So you can see it first. Maybe you can pause the video if you want to see more details about the differences. And then let's move on to the next slide. There is another difference about the number of lifeboats on both ships. So When the first launch, Titanic and Olympic also, only had 20 lifeboats available. After the Titanic sinking in 1912, White Star Line decided to add more lifeboats to Olympic to 64 lifeboats in total because when the Titanic went down, there's a lot of fatalities. So the White Star Line, the company that owned Titanic and Olympic, decided to add more lifeboats on Olympic. So if the Olympic sink like Titanic, it can save more passengers. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. Titanic maiden voyage tragedy. Titanic was made its maiden voyage on April 10, 1912. Unlike Olympic, who made an unsuccessful maiden voyage, Titanic made a disaster maiden voyage because Titanic sinking because she hit an iceberg in the middle of Atlantic Ocean. So Titanic and Olympic has the same routes. Titanic started from Queenstown, departing from Queenstown, and then make a quick stop on Cherbourg and Southampton, and then she departs to New York City in North America. Then, as you can see, Titanic hits an iceberg when when Titanic was on its journey to New York City. On the night of April 14, 1912, 11:40 p.m., Titanic crew reported an iceberg warning. After that, the Titanic crew trying to avoid the icebergs, but sadly, minutes later, Titanic hit the iceberg. So after the Titanic hit the iceberg, Captain Edward and Thomas Andrew checked the damage and found that iceberg damaged 5 compartments. Actually, Titanic designed to be still afloat if the 4 forward compartment is flooded. So Titanic could still afloat if only 4 compartment damage. I mean, 4 compartment flooded. So Titanic will still afloat if only 4 compartment flooded. But the icebergs damage 5 compartment, and then 5 compartment get flooded. The Titanic can't handle it. And then after the Captain Edward and Thomas Andrew see that the iceberg damaged 5 compartment, the watertight doors are closed to extend ship's sinking time. Okay, let's move on. After that, shortly after, the crew are preparing the lifeboats so the passengers can evacuate as quickly as possible. And then Thomas Andrew said the estimated time left until the Titanic is totally submerged is 1.5 hours until 2 hours. So there's several time to to evacuate passengers as quickly as possible. But one of the reasons why Titanic has a lot of fatalities is the first reason is the first boat to leave the Titanic is only contain 28 28 passengers out of 65 lifeboat capacity. On 12:40 a.m., Lifeboat 7 was the first lifeboat to be launched from the ship, but it only contains 28 passengers out of 65 lifeboat capacity. Why? The answer is because the passengers do not believe that the Titanic is sinking. Because passengers know this ship is cannot sinking. You know, this is unsinkable ship. So passengers do not believe that Titanic is sinking. They thought that this is only a simulation of emergency. And then on 12:44 a.m., Lifeboat 5 was the second lifeboat to be launched from the ship and contains 36 passengers. Let's move on to the next slide. On 12:45 a.m., Titanic telegraph operator began using SOS signal. So at that time, Titanic telegraph started using SOS signal to give information that the Titanic is sinking. And then on 12:47 a.m., Titanic crew started using distress rocket in an attempt to signal the ship on the horizon. So if there's any nearest ship in the location, the ship can see the rockets because apa so the ship in the area can see the rockets, so it can save Titanic. Let's move on to the next slide. On 12:49 a.m., RMS Carpathia received Titanic SOS signal and on its way to Titanic with estimated time for 4 hours until arrive in Titanic. 4 hours. Meanwhile, Titanic sink is only 1.5 hours to 2 hours. On 1:20 a.m., more lifeboats are getting launched from the ship with women and children only policy. So the crew are prioritized women and children only. So men cannot save. So I mean, like the men cannot escape. I mean, evacuate the ship using lifeboat. On 10:40 a.m., Titanic deck started to fill up with water. So the water started to filling up the deck, which is a very bad sign. And then on 2 a.m., Titanic's propellers rising from the sea level. So you can see how huge that propellers was. Yeah, it's pretty huge. And then on 2:15 a.m., one of the Titanic forward funnel collapsed and hit people below it. So the funnel collapsed and then hitting people below it, and people who got hit by the funnel die instantly because that funnel is about 1 tons. Yeah, it's very heavy. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. Okay, all lifeboats are deployed. There's no lifeboats left, but there's are approximately 1,500 people still on board the Titanic. So all lifeboats are gone. All lifeboats are gone. There's no lifeboat left, but there is still approximately 1,500 people still on board the Titanic. Can you imagine being in the middle of Atlantic Ocean with cold temperature and you're on a sinking ship? That would be very scary. And then on 2:18 a.m., Titanic split and then she break in a half. So you can see from the picture, it shows that Titanic split and break in a half. It's very scary. On 2:20 a.m., Titanic was fully submerged, fully sinking. Passengers who survived on a lifeboat must wait until RMS Carpathia came and rescued them. So the passengers who got survived on the lifeboat, they must wait until RMS Carpathia arrived and rescue them. Can you imagine being alone in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean 2:20 a.m. with no lights at all? It's very, oh my god, I can't imagine how scary it would be. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. On 4 a.m., Carpathia arrived at the Titanic sinking site, and then at 4:10 a.m., first lifeboat was saved by Carpathia, and 8:30 a.m., last lifeboat that was saved by Carpathia. So when Carpathia arrived at the Titanic sinking site on 4 a.m., the crew must search for another lifeboat because my lifeboat is uh, was so they must search they need to search for another lifeboat, yeah, like that. And then on April 18 around 12:15 p.m., Carpaccio arrived in New York City, bringing hundreds of Titanic survivors. And then, when the Titanic sank in April 14, 1912, Titanic wreck was not discovered until 1985 near Newfoundland, under 3,800 meters or 12,500 feet below sea level. Can you imagine? The ship Titanic sank in 1912 and it was not discovered until 1985. Can you imagine how long it would take to discover only one ship sinking? Well, that's a very, very long time to discover a ship sinking. Like a shipwreck. And then, after the Titanic sank, okay, this is the history. Okay, this is a little bit history after the Titanic sank. After Titanic sinking, White Star Line decided to build another identical ship like Titanic and Olympic. Her name is Britannic. At first, Britannic was supposed to be a passenger ship, but and then after Britannic launch on after the Britannic launch, the World War One began. So Britannic converted from RMS into HMHS. What HMHS is? HMHS is stand for His Majesty Hospital Ship. So Britannic was supposed to be a passenger ship converted into hospital ship, bringing of hundreds of British soldier, and so it's like a floating hospital like that during World War One. But sadly, HMHS Britannic have the same fate as Titanic because Britannic sank after hitting German mine underwater bomb, and Britannic sank for 55 minutes. But because Britannic has a lot of lifeboats, unlike Titanic, Britannic only has 30 people died on the tragedy. Yeah, because Britannic has a lot more lifeboat unlike Titanic. So Britannic only have 30 fatalities. So Britannic sank in the island of Kea when she was bringing hundreds of wounded soldiers. Yeah, and then he sank after hitting a German mine underwater bomb. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. After the sinking of RMS Titanic and HMHS Britannic, Olympic was the last one who didn't sink. Olympic was the one who stayed on service longer until April 1935 when Olympic was scrapped. So RMS Olympic is the last sister of three Olympic class. So Britannic, Olympic, and Titanic is an Olympic class ship liner passenger line, and Olympic is the one who didn't sink and still on service longer until April 1935 when Olympic gets scrapped. And that's the end of the story of the Olympic class liner. Okay, that's the end of the slide, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you enjoy my presentation. Yeah, I hope you like it. Don't forget to click subscribe, click like button if you like it. See you guys on the next video. Bye bye. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.